Okay guys, so in case you didn't know already, this is the Shimano Trout 1 bait casting rod. And as the name signifies, this is made for targeting trout in small streams and rivers and creeks that they have in Japan. Now to go over the rod specs briefly, it's a very short 5 foot long. As you can see, it's got a super short handle that is made for one-handed use. Now as you can see, it's 2 pieces and it's got an ultralight rating, meaning the lure rating is only 1 gram to 7 grams tops. So this thing is meant to cast tiny lures. Now I imported this rod from Japan back in the latter half of 2017 because I was taking a trip to Colorado and I was going to pair this up with a bait finesse reel and target trout in a few of the thousands of streams and rivers and creeks that they have in Colorado that have trout in it. And let me tell you what, once I paired up this rod with the super lightweight Shimano ALDEBARAN and got out to Colorado and got used to using only one hand for casting, I was hooked. I was literally firing these super light lures with just a flick of the wrist, and it would just fire these lures out there, and I was just, the accuracy was amazing. I could hit the exact target that I was looking at. So I was pretty much hooked on, you know, these small, tiny bait casting rods that allow you to just use one hand. But here's the problem. Now the problem is that this rod cost almost $250 to import from Japan. So of course I intended to use this to target fish in, you know, my local little creeks and streams, etc., etc. But I'm kind of hesitant to, you know, keep this in the trunk of my car or the back seat because as you can see, the rod blank is super thin and I didn't want to risk breaking this blank or even this top section by, you know, having something bang into it or fall on it, etc., etc. So, you know, I'm getting very little use out of this rod. Only on special occasions will I whip it out and use it. Very planned special occasions, I should say. So about a year ago, I was browsing around on AliExpress, big surprise there, and I come across this rod right here. Now 2 things about this rod caught my eye. Now the first thing, of course, was the super good looking styling of this thing. And the second thing was the price. These rods start out at only $25, and to my door, it costed only around $32 shipped. So right now, they're even cheaper than what I bought mine for, if you look on the AliExpress website. Now this is the Stream Angler, and that's the only name they gave for it. Now with a name like that, you know exactly what this thing is made for. Now let's go over the specs real quick. It's a 2-piece, as you can see. It's got a lure rating of 1.5 grams to 5 grams. So it's made to cast ultralight lures. And it comes in 2 lengths, 4'6" and then 5'6", which is what I have, the 5'6". As you can see, this thing looks badass. It's got that ACS style reel seat. It's got this 4-nut with a carbon ring around it. Hopefully you can see that. This machined piece here is really high quality. It's got a lot of nice detailing on it. Here's the butt section here. It's got a blank end cap, but still. So basically, for this price, you can get almost 10 of these for the price of one Shimano Trout 1 rod. So let me tell you what I don't like about it, and there's not really that much that I can say that's bad about it. You can see that cork quality is not the greatest, but for the price, who cares? You can buy some sealer and seal in these pits. The reel seat has a big gap between it and the rod blank, as you can see. Pretty big gap. And the handle length, for being, you know, a rod like this where you generally just gonna use one hand, it's kind of long. They should lop off probably about 1.5 inches off the end and add it to the tip to give us more casting length. And then I don't know if it's with all the rods, but with my particular one, sometimes the top section comes loose during fishing and I have to retighten it. And maybe that's just my fault for not tightening it down hard enough. But yeah, only $25 to $30 for this rod right here. And now if you look on AliExpress, there are several dozen examples of rods just like this. So not only is this a review of the Stream Angler rod, it's a review of pretty much any affordable little bait finesse stream rods that you can get off AliExpress. So it looks good and the price is oh so right, but how does it perform? You know, looking good and being cheap is one thing, but you know, that means nothing if it sucks in performance or if it falls apart in your hand when using it. So let's find out. Okay guys, so this part of the video was filmed last year around Father's Day. My cousin had come up and we decided to do some creek wading for some smallmouth. In keeping with the budget theme of this rod, I paired it up with the $50-ish High-Bow Steed bait caster. Now the Steed disappointed me on the casting field, but I decided to give it another chance to impress me with some creek fishing. So I decided to spool it up with some 4-pound fluorocarbon, and in case you didn't know, I got my cousin a High-Bow Steed Lure Killer Big Trout combo a few months ago for his first BFS combo. So basically we're just two jackasses using budget bait finesse tackle from AliExpress. Now his combo costs around $113 and mine right around $87 to $88. So I'm pretty much going to narrate this entire video because pretty much all you would hear if I didn't was, man, if I get some chiggers, I'm whooping your ass. A bunch of cuss words and a bunch of insults said about each other's mothers. You know, pretty much typical male bonding and not very YouTube friendly. Now this is the first time we've been to this place, and I know the water looks really shallow and the creek looks pretty dry, and it actually was in most places, but there were some deep spots. Now the only bait that I brought was some KASTKING easy shiners in the 2 and 3 inch sizes, and he went with some kind of small plastic crawl. As you can see, I foolishly didn't get rigged up at the car like he did, so while I'm sitting there rigging up my lure, he catches a fish on what I think it's his second or third cast. Now, at first I thought it was some kind of a big bluegill or panfish, but it turns out to be a little red-eye bass, and I think it's his first ever red-eye, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so let's talk about this rod. As you can see in this video, this creek is probably no more than 20 yards wide, so a small little rod like this is really perfect for it. Now, paired up with the right reel, you can literally cast a tiny bait finesse lure across the entire creek with no problem. So I end up using the 2 inch KASTKING easy shiner with I believe a 1/32 ounce or 1/16 ounce head. Either way, a really small bait finesse lure. Now it took me a couple of casts to get used to how the rod loads up and how it felt with the High-Bow Steed mounted on it, but in no time I was making pretty pinpoint accurate casts into tight spots with ease. Now that's the beauty of one-handed casts for bait finesse. Now, of course that can also be done with longer rods, but with one hand it's just so much easier in my opinion, and not to mention much more satisfying. So it turns out this creek was just chock full of shiners and minnows, so my little swim bait was pretty much ineffective with so many real bait fish in this creek. Even though the water was crystal clear, we really didn't see any bass swimming around out in the open, so we targeted as much of the structure as we could. But just because you can't see bass doesn't mean they aren't there, as my cousin demonstrates by catching this little creek smallmouth.
Now this little $30 rod did everything I wanted it to do. It loaded up that tiny lure and casted it with no problems. The tip is really soft and flexible, and it actually would have been a lot better if the HIBO Steed wasn't such a piece of shit. About every fourth cast I had an overrun that I had to pick out. So basically I had to cast a lot slower and more deliberate than I normally would to keep the spool from blowing up. And as you can see here, the thumb bar came completely off. Now strangely enough, my cousin's HIBO Steed has been pretty bulletproof as far as reliability, and he fishes his at least every weekend. So that's HIBO quality control for you. So I basically ended up skunking that day, and he ended up catching several fish in other spots that we hit along the way home. So this is a few months later in early fall, and my cousin texts me to go fishing, and I remember what happened last time, so I told him I was sick, and then of course I went fishing all by myself. Now this is a creek I've checked out several times in the past, and each time I saw absolutely no bass, only a few panfish, so I never gave it much thought. So remembering that just because I couldn't see any bass didn't mean there weren't any there, I decided to give this creek a shot. Now this time around I went with a SHIMANO ALDEBARAN 50, throwing the same 2 to 3 inch Kitex. Initially I only saw some panfish but no bass. Now with this much better reel I could cast with confidence knowing the spool would blow up on me. As you can see, this is another creek that is a perfect place to use a rod like this. There was so much structure underwater that you really needed pinpoint accurate casting. So finally, after several casts, I hooked into what turns out to be a nice little creek bass. Now this bass isn't very big, but on this ultralight rod, it feels like a much bigger fish pulling on your line, and you kind of have to really finesse it in. If I'm not mistaken, it's a really pretty spotted bass, or it could be a largemouth. So after fishing about another 30 or 40 minutes, I'd end up catching a couple more bass that were smaller before heading out. But they still put up a really good fight on this ultralight rod. Okay guys, so let's go over my final thoughts on this rod and what I'm going to be using it for. Now to put it in perspective, let me tell you what happened earlier today when I went fishing. Now I only brought two setups with me, a 6'10" medium and a 7'2" heavy, with regular bait casters mounted on them. Now while I was fishing, I saw this small dam discharge pond at the bottom of this hill. Now it looks really shallow with no signs of fish, but then I saw a fish boil. Now keep in mind, this is a very tiny discharge, no more than 15 foot wide and only a couple of feet deep, but it turns out there were several bass trapped in there. Now I only had the 7'2" heavy combo on hand with me with a 3/8 ounce jig tied on, and the bass weren't very big, but I really wanted to catch them, and I tried with the jig, but they really weren't having it. So what's the point of this story? The point is that I should have had a cheap portable bait finesse rod like this one, along with a bait finesse reel in the trunk of my car or in the back seat, just for situations like this. Something cheap and that performs well, that you can keep in your vehicle, that you don't care if it gets beat up or scratched up, because it didn't cost you hundreds of dollars. Now in fact, I think I'll be doing that with this reel that you see right here, the Surunaya XF50. Here I filled the spool less than halfway, and it really wakes this reel up as far as casting goes. Now paired up with this rod, I can just flick my wrist and hit the exact spots I was aiming at on the other side of this creek. So with spring here and summer fast approaching, the creek wading season is coming up really soon. So I really recommend this rod, or any of the several dozen rods like this on AliExpress, for all you guys who want to hit the creeks and small rivers with bait finesse gear and you don't want to break the bank, or for all you hardcore bait finesse junkies who don't want to store your high dollar JDM combos in your car. This rod would be great for you. Now of course the rod is not perfect, but for the price it doesn't have to be. Okay guys, thanks a lot.